Hello, I'm Karl Wells, and welcome to Point to Point. My guest today is Roger Grimes, the 8th Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador. Before politics, he was a teacher, and at one point served as the president of the Newfoundland and Labrador Teachers Association. You were born in Grand Falls, and I was actually born in a neighboring town.
Oh, really?
Buckins.
Excellent. Yeah.
So what was it like growing up in Grand Falls in the 1950s and 60s?
Well, actually, I still say to this day, and I've still got a lot of family there, brothers, sister, my daughter, granddaughter, that kind of thing, so I'm there regularly. It was a great place to grow up. I always say now, it was a great place to be from, because, and when I talk about it with high school friends of mine and all that kind of stuff, everybody always has the good memories of the opportunities we had. Because it was a company town until 1962, it didn't incorporate and have municipal government until 1962. Before that, the mill manager ran the town. And of course—
So in essence, he was the mayor?
He was the mayor. He ran the whole shot. And the thing was, we had, there was a big emphasis on education, because the mill themselves, they were Brits, and they would not hire people in the mill unless they finished high school. So you wouldn't, you couldn't get a summer job at 15 or 16 years old. They wouldn't take you. So they encouraged education. There were great education opportunities. They had the drama clubs. We had the golf course. We had a curling club. We had an indoor hockey rink. And the population was small enough that there was always something you could do. So there were opportunities galore. And it did the whole spectrum: academia, arts, sports and recreation. Everything was there. We always say when we're chatting that if you couldn't find something to do as a young person, a teenager, growing up in Grand Falls, Windsor now, back in the 50s and 60s, is because you didn't want anything to do. There was something to do all the time, a vibrant, active, wonderful community that gave us lots of advantages that people in other parts of rural Newfoundland and Labrador didn't really have available to them.
Makes you wonder why Gordon Pinson ever left?
Oh, absolutely, of course, and he became a big icon of ours. And when the Rowdy Man came out and he became like a national hero, then everybody was so justifiably proud, and still are. And he visits regularly, by the way, when he's back in Newfoundland.
Yes, I know.
He sure does.
Tell me about your parents, Roger.
Yeah, well, Mom and Dad had an interesting story. They sort of met on the mainland coming back to Newfoundland, because my mother was working on the mainland. Dad was traveling around doing odd jobs. They were coming back because apparently my father heard of an opportunity in a paper mill in Grand Falls where there could be like work, steady work, instead of having to do like a lot of Newfoundlanders, chase a job here, chase a job there. There could be steady work. And apparently they met waiting for the ferry. And when they got back into Grand Falls, Windsor, and of course they reconnected, and it led to us. But my mother basically was an adopted child herself. Dad came from down around Herring Neck. I visited the home site down there just a year or so ago, actually. And from a seafaring thing, that's what happened to them. On the boats, young, ended up down in what they call the Boston States, traveled across the States, back across Canada, worked in the mill. So from both of them, my mother was like the matriarch. She ran the place. I mean, she had 14 children. 12 of us, a couple passed fairly young. So basically we said 12 of us grew up together, almost like a year apart, that kind of thing, so you knew everybody. And she ran the whole show. So Dad would go to the mill, come home, give the paycheck. She might give him a couple of dollars for himself, and the rest, she ran the whole show. And that was fairly common, by the way, in many parts of Newfoundland and Labrador. And a very devoutly religious person, a staunch Pentecostal, not only matriarch of our home, but also a staunch matriarch in the Pentecostal church in Windsor. So, and then Dad, of course, when he wasn't working and being told what he was allowed to do with us by Mom, then he was involved in the community. So he was like a community activist his whole life, involved in organizing with sports groups, the union, the Liberal Party, running for council, all those kinds of things. So from the both of them, there was a sense of, even though you were busy and there was a lot on the go, you were never too busy to get involved in things that you liked or were interested in, and it just seemed to give us a sense, I guess, that it was second nature, that if you were going to be there, you might as well get involved. You might as well do something. So, and interestingly enough, my father was Citizen of the Year one year, and my oldest brother, Owen, who passed away a few years ago, he was Citizen of the Year a few years later, which is an interesting story. But it showed, I think, the way it was sort of, it just came as a natural in our family, that because of what you saw as role models from your parents, that you got involved, you did things, you volunteered, you gave your opinion, you offered to help out, those kinds of things. So very interesting, and I was very fortunate in many ways to grow up in that town and in that kind of a family environment.
So what kind of a relationship did you have with your parents? Was it close? Was it influential?
Yeah, very much so. Closer with my mother, because I just had such great love and respect for her, how she managed. Because here's a house full of youngsters, and it didn't seem to faze her. Like, she had everything under control. Very loving, very friendly, very nice, and always wanting to invite, even with the crowd we had, always wanting to invite more people in the house. Put another potato in the pot, that'll feed another 3 or 4 if they come through the door, those kinds of things. And from my dad, it was the notion of, he was always the boogeyman that mother kept around. Like, your father will do something to you if you don't behave. He wasn't going to do anything anyway. But that was always the threat, to stick in the corner, which you never had to use. But to see how he participated in the community and how he led organizations and how he got involved, you had to have a great deal of respect for the man in terms of how he would just naturally sort of move towards those kinds of involvement. So I thought the world of both of them for very different reasons.
So did you live in a big house, a small house, an apartment? What was your home life like?
For us, we moved into the house that I remember most when I was 5, because before that, recollections are a little scanty.
That's right.
But from 5 on, we moved into what was then a big 2-story house. Now there were a bunch of us. There were still probably 9 or 10 kids at home.
Wow.
There's only 5 bedrooms. So, it wasn't uncommon to sleep like 3 or 4 in a bed. So you took the 4 boys and shoved them into bed sideways, and that was good enough. So you were happy, at least you were warm. So you didn't have to worry about those kinds of things. And the girls had their room, the boys had their room. Some of the older fellows that were finished in high school might need a bit more space. They had a room, and it was, it was busy all the time. But it was organized because of the way my mother ran everything. She was like the sergeant major. Everybody was out of bed in time in the morning, up and gone here and gone there and out the door, back for lunch. Used to go home for cooked dinner then, by the way, in the middle of the day.
Of course.
So, at noontime, and a full-fledged meal on the table, and then supper and all those kinds of things. And everything was done, organized, cleaned up, done, organized, cleaned up. And it was busy, exciting, fun. Looking back at it now, I realize we didn't have much, but we didn't know we didn't have much. We thought we had plenty because we were well-fed, clothed, warm, happy, leading full lives, busy lives. We were encouraged to get involved in anything and everything that was an interest of yours. And that was another good thing from both our parents. It wasn't saying, well, you should do this or you should do that. It was like, if you want to try it, you go right ahead. We'll help you out if we can. We might be able to help you much, but if you want to have a go at that, you go and have a go at that and see how you do it. See if you really like it. So it was really wonderful from that. And the further you get, because both my parents have been deceased now for 15 or 20 years, that range for sure. And but the memories even get stronger and better. Mm-hmm. And it's something I often say to people when they're going through, a period when someone passes that's near and dear to them, that the sorrow is always replaced by the great memories of the wonderful times you had together. And that's my case with my family growing up. I suppose there must have been some hardship there, but I don't sense it. I don't remember it. I remember good, warm, happy feelings of being surrounded by people that loved you.
And it sounds like you got lots of positive reinforcement.
No
There
doubt
was
about
none
it.
of this, oh,
Yeah.
you can't do that.
No,
or-
absolutely.
That's right. Yeah.
And I think that led to one of the things that, for me in all my life, one of the things I used to keep a little plaque in my office, wherever it was, at the NLTA, as a cabinet minister, in the Premier's office, and it said, very simply, it said, attitude is everything. So, keep a positive attitude. The glass really is half full, and let's see what you can do.
Mm-hmm. Tell me about your school years.
Oh, school.
Elementary school. And
yeah, and it was the same thing with a big crowd, and I used to use this line when I was teaching all the time, by the way, because you'd introduce yourself, as the teacher to new classes every year. And I'd say, it's Mr. Grimes, that's grime, dirt with an S, in case you don't know, and all this kind of stuff. And I used to tell them, I said, I might be a bit strange, but I said, I'm here as a teacher now because when I was in school, I liked school so much that I really didn't want to leave. Like, you were graduating, but I didn't want it to end. I really enjoyed everything about school. I was curious, I was interested in things. I liked learning stuff, didn't matter what it was. History, geography, language, reading stuff, math. I was a math science teacher. I liked that because there was a bit more logic to it. But I enjoyed all of it, really. I enjoyed the experience. And I got involved in everything. You'd be involved in student council and all the sports stuff and the drama club and whatever was there, you'd try to get into it because it was all interesting. It was all different. It was a matter of trying to experience it, and I wanted the full experience, and I really liked it. So, and back in those days, in the late '60s, when you went to university, you didn't have to do general studies. You could actually go in. Like the first year I went in to be a teacher, because I figured the next best thing, if I like being down here amongst these, there used to be 35 or 40 seats in the class at that time. If I liked it that much, being one of the 35 or 40, then you'd probably even like it more if you were the one up in the front. So why not just change your position and keep the experience going? And I was teaching, I guess all told, parts of 20 years and loved it as well. And the same kind of thing, by the way, Karl, in teaching, it was never a job to me. It was what you did, is what you lived. So you did the classwork, which was probably the least enjoyable of it all, but then the extracurricular involvement with the students, helping out with the sports teams and helping out with the yearbook and helping out with the drama club and making sure that they had chaperones for their dances and their functions and all those kinds of things. And that's where, when I meet former students now, back then, of course, they always used to try to, show you a bit of disrespect by not calling you Mr. Grimes, or so, call you by your nickname or something like that, and you'd have to correct them, And now they come up to you and they don't try to use a nickname. They say, "Oh, Mr. Grimes, so good to see you. I haven't seen you like in 30 years." And then they'll tell you where you taught. Some of them I remember, and typical with teaching, I'm sure of it, is that you tend to remember the really good ones, and you tend to remember the really bad ones. Mm-hmm. In terms of those that were a little bit of troublemakers and those kinds of things. And in between, there was hundreds of them that you may not place as quickly as you place those others that stood out a bit more for whatever the reason. So, but they remember you because there was only one of you. There was 30 or 40 of them 10 times over, so each year. And it was,
so I have to ask
experience.
you, did they in fact have a nickname for you?
Oh, absolutely.
Well, can you tell me what it was?
Well, mine came from, I guess, hockey days at the time, because I was playing senior hockey with the Cataracts at the time too for most of a good part of my teaching career out in Central. And my nickname at hockey for everybody was Popsy. So they'd put their hand up in the class. Instead of saying, Mr. Grimes, can I leave the washroom, or I have a question, they'd say Popsy, and I'd say, excuse me. For you, that's Popsy, sir, because we're in school. So you diffuse the matter and carry on. But now they don't come up and say, how are you, Popsy? Now they come up and say, Mr. Grimes, so good to see you again. Because
so
again, I enjoyed it, and I think most of the students I had enjoyed, I really enjoyed teaching.
I'm guessing you didn't teach in the same school for the whole 20 years.
No, my goodness, I had some amazing experiences in teaching.
So where did you teach?
Which probably led me to the NLTA. But I started off, of course, being from a Pentecostal background, wanting to go back to Grand Falls, Windsor at the time, mainly so I could try and see if I could make the senior hockey team. So I wanted to go home to try to play for the Cataracts, which I was lucky enough to make the team and play for 8 or 9 years or whatever. But the only place I could get a job going back at that time, because the denominational system was so firmly entrenched, was in the Pentecostal system. So I taught for the first couple of years in the Pentecostal system, a grade 7 to 11, no grade 12 at the time. 7, math, science, and a bit of other things to fill out the schedule. And met a couple of people, by the way, after that I played hockey with, that I coached in school. A couple of Hall of Famers now, Gene Faulkner, Wayne Faulkner, those guys. Nephews, of course, of Alec and George and that group. And so I taught those guys, taught with their mother actually on the same staff. Got into a little bit of trouble there because in the Pentecostal system, the teachers were supposed to be good examples, of course, for the students. I wasn't particularly, because I wasn't a full-fledged professing Pentecostal at the time, which was a little bit of a problem. But then again, I was playing hockey in the senior league, and I played hockey on Sundays. Now, back in that time, for a Pentecostal, that was taboo.
Right.
You didn't engage in any sports activities or anything else on a Sunday. You only worked on a Sunday if it was absolutely required from your job. So that was the environment at the time. So there was a little bit of tension going on, and at the meantime, in the Catholic school, the all-boys Catholic school, up the road, where I had done some student teaching when I was finishing my degree at the university, Brother Healy, who was their chemistry, physics, science guy, got transferred. And the Christian brother that they brought in was an English teacher. So they were looking for a chemistry guy, a chemistry physics guy, which happened to be me. Now the big question was, in the early 70s, was the Catholic school board going to hire a Protestant? Not only a Protestant, but like a Pentecostal, the worst kind of a Protestant, like as far to the extreme as you could get. So they did hire me, and Brother Fallon at the time, Jerry Fallon, whom I worked with afterwards on education reform, because he became the head of the Catholic Education Council and so on, after he left the Christian Brothers. He was the principal. And he welcomed me to the school, and he said, now, Roger, he said, you understand two things. Number one is that if we could have found a Catholic with your qualifications, you wouldn't be getting this job. You know that, right? I said, I understand, brother. Right? This is a Catholic school. I'm not Catholic, But to their credit, they put the qualification and the idea of having a science teacher ahead of being a Catholic who wasn't qualified. So I give them full marks and full credit for that. And then secondly, he said, now, his expression was, my boys, because there was almost 500 boys in school, all boys school. He said, if any of my boys ever come up to you and mention religion, I want you to send them straight to me. Don't you dare talk to my boys about religion, because you don't know anything about the Catholic religion.
You weren't qualified.
I wasn't qualified in that respect. So we understood each other, had a great time there. Another person that I ended up having tremendous respect for, he was Brother Fallon at the time, Jerry Fallon now, was a tremendous administrator, a great leader, and a very disciplined, fair, an outstanding administrator, actually. Probably one of the best, if not the best, that I worked with over 20 years. So, move the story along a bit. The all-girls school was across the street. They weren't offered chemistry because they were girls, and they had decided, I guess, they didn't need it. And they were doing a little bit of physics, no honors math. So some of the brighter students, several of whom I'm still in contact with now and are very successful in their own right, they petitioned the school board to have chemistry available because they wanted to go to university and take chemistry. So I volunteered, they came to me, and I volunteered to go over and teach them during their lunch breaks. So they'd pack a lunch, and instead of taking the hour and a half off, which you used to do at that time, we'd all have like a little bagged lunch, and we'd sit in the lab at St. Catherine's, the all-girls school, do chemistry. And then when we missed, we'd finish up the rest on Saturday mornings. So I agreed to do it, and they volunteered to do it, which is incredible dedication for a group of high school girls getting ready to, they wanted to write the public exam in chemistry, and it wasn't offered by the school board for girls. So I did it voluntarily. They all succeeded. They all went on and had great careers. Still have a great chat when I bump into a few of them. Then I got transferred over there full time. Now another great story, because of course now I'm a Protestant male in an all-girls Catholic school headed up by nuns. And so the introduction with the nun at the time, she says the same thing. She says, "Now, Mr. Grimes," she said, "you do understand, not that, you know, if we could have got a qualified person, different from Brother Fallon," she said, "you do understand that I don't want you in this school." I said, "Well, thanks for the warm welcome."
That's pretty forthright.
That's pretty forthright. So, okay, give her credit for being honest, straightforward. So we understood each other. She wanted no part of a male in the school, for starters, and certainly not a male Protestant.
Why politics? What motivated you to become a politician and the member for exploits, I guess?
Well, I don't know if there was a lot of motivation. It was probably from the point of view that my dad had always been a huge, big, liberal worker in central Newfoundland. Like anyone in that area at that time would have known that Fred Grimes was like Mr. Liberal.
I'm guessing he was a Joey Smallwood liberal. Right?
Joey Smallwood liberal. And matter of fact, by the way, he looked a lot like Joey. Mm-hmm. I have a picture at home of my dad and Joey at the mall in Grand Falls, the Exploits Valley Mall, where Joey is signing a copy of his book for my father, and they're in the same picture. And it's hard to tell who's who. They look that much alike.
Wow.
So it was, you know, so we did that, and we worked on campaigns from the time we were kids, handing out flyers and posters and all those kinds of things. Had the great opportunity to be involved in that great Liberal Leadership Convention in 1969 down at Memorial Stadium with Joey and Crosby and Alec Hickman and all those people. That was great.
We were there at the same time?
Absolutely, yeah. It was a lot of fun. It was a great experience. Glad I was, you know, could look back and say we were part of it. And then when the opportunity came along with a vacant seat, by this time in '89, I had already been president of the teachers union and those kinds of things, so I had a bit of a provincial profile. So the parties had been making overtures to me, all of them, to say, you should think about running for election. And of course, my heart would have been with the Liberals, if not, then with the NDP, either, you know, being a union leader, one or the other. And an opportunity arose in Exploits District, and a vacant seat. Dr. Hugh Toomey, who was revered and respected like you wouldn't believe in the community before that and in the whole district for his time as an MHA and the health minister and so on.
You ended up fairly soon in Clyde Wells's cabinet. I think, was it employment and labor relations?
Yes, it was, yeah.
I guess that was because of your experience as NTA president.
No question. I think that would have been the driving force.
But of all the portfolios that you held, was there one that you enjoyed more than another, where you thought you might have been more effective?
Yeah, I think looking back, it was pretty obvious to me now that it was almost like I was destined to become the education minister with Brian Tobin, because we had made an attempt at changing the denominational system with Clyde Wells. We had a referendum. We were trying to implement some changes that were made. Brian Tobin had become the premier, made me education minister, and I was tasked with implementing the changes that had been done with Clyde Wells. And after 7 or 8 months of that, I reported back to him that they were basically unworkable, because it was going to be like a public system with sort of a denominational subsystem within it. It was cumbersome and awkward, and it wasn't a good fit. And he decided to start over, have another referendum, and say, we're going to have a school system that respects religion and those kinds of things, but the churches will have no say in the administration of it. And if you do want to still have denominational schools, they'll have to be private. And I was glad to travel the province and help, I guess, promote that referendum and then do the implementation of that. And I was the Minister of Education, actually, when we introduced a bill to establish the current day public education system in Newfoundland and Labrador. So,
when you ran for Premier, or leader of the party, I should say, after Brian Tobin, There was quite a battle between you and John Efford, as I recall. How are you two guys getting along these days?
Oh, as well as ever. John, I understand John, unfortunately, is having some health challenges more so than some of the rest of us at this point in time. But John was such a committed, dedicated representative, you know, and he believed in his, I think he believed in his heart and soul that he was destined to be the Premier. And he wanted it very badly. And he almost became, you know, by virtue of becoming the leader, he would have been the Premier and came very close, but it didn't happen. And I think he was sorely disappointed in it. And we don't talk about it and haven't talked about it, and our paths don't cross very often nowadays. But even afterwards, the few times we did meet, it was all civil and so on, but the bitter disappointment that he felt lingered for a long time and led to the point that he didn't want to stay in the cabinet. You know, I was going to have him as the Deputy Premier and Minister of Development. He was dissatisfied, chose to leave and go federally and those kinds of things. And all of it together was part of, I guess, leading to a point in time where it was time for the Liberal Party to be removed from government, because we had a good long run, we had done a bunch of things, time catches up with everything, and we had done some pretty severe damage to ourselves internally. So by the time the election came in 2003, we were not a cohesive fighting unit, as you would say. We were a little bit fractured.
Well, you know, the Liberals had been in power for quite a few years.
Absolutely.
I mean, because there was Wells, there was Tobin, and I guess people probably wanted a change.
Oh, no doubt, and that was the very theme that I got elected on in 1989.
Roger, we could continue talking, I know, but unfortunately our time is up. But thank you very much for the conversation.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I enjoyed it very, very much.
My pleasure.
And that's this edition of Karl Wells' Point to Point.